At the divorce settlement, my ex screamed, "I kept the properties. Too bad you got that little futureless company." Her lawyer and lover smiled. I closed my briefcase, adjusted my tie, and slid an envelope across the table. When she read that I sold the company for $1.7 billion, she fainted. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I'm Martin, and I'm 56 years old. 25 years of marriage ended in that sterile conference room on a Tuesday morning in October, with my wife Ashley laughing at what she thought was my failure. The mahogany table stretched between us like a chasm. Ashley sat across from me, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the polished surface, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Next to her, David Richardson adjusted his expensive tie, the same hands that had been touching my wife for God knows how long now, shuffling through legal documents with practiced ease. David had been our family lawyer for 8 years. I trusted him with everything. Our wills, property transfers, business contracts. He knew every detail of our financial life, every asset we owned, every investment I'd made. That trust felt like acid in my stomach now, burning through whatever was left of my dignity. "So, Martin," Ashley's voice cut through the silence, saccharine sweet with victory, "you're really going to take that little tech company of yours and walk away from everything else?" I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Inside, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "That's what we agreed on," I said quietly. David leaned back in his leather chair, barely containing his amusement. "I have to say, Martin, I tried to warn you during our consultations. In today's market, small tech companies like yours, well, they're essentially worthless. The competition from major corporations, the overhead costs, the lack of proper funding." He shook his head with mock concern. "You'd be much better off liquidating whatever assets the company has and taking cash instead." Ashley giggled. Actually giggled. The sound hit me like a physical blow. This was the woman I'd held during her father's funeral, the woman I'd stayed up with through 3 miscarriages, the woman I'd built a life with, and she was giggling at what she thought was my ruin. "David's right, honey," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I mean, I've watched you struggle with that company for the past 2 years, working all those crazy hours, missing dinners, coming home exhausted and stressed. And for what? A business that barely pays the bills?" I swallowed hard, remembering all those nights I'd come home to find the house dark, Ashley already in bed, or more accurately, already on the phone with David. Those long hours weren't struggle, they were the most important work of my life. But they didn't know that. They couldn't know that. "The house in Westfield alone is worth $2.4 million, David continued, sliding a document across the table. "The vacation home in Martha's Vineyard is valued at $1.8 million. The investment portfolio we've built over the years, Ashley will be walking away with assets worth nearly $6 million total." Ashley's smile widened. "While you get to keep your little startup that's probably worth what, 50,000? Maybe 100 if you're lucky?" My throat felt tight, but I forced myself to speak normally. "The company means something to me. It's my work, my passion project." "Passion project," Ashley repeated, as if the words tasted funny. "Martin, you're 56 years old. Don't you think it's time to be practical? David could help you find a position at a real company, something stable with benefits and a pension." The condescension in her voice was unbearable. For 2 years I'd watched her grow more distant, more critical, more cruel. She'd started questioning every business decision I made, rolling her eyes when I talked about work, making snide comments about my failed entrepreneur phase to her friends at dinner parties. I should have seen it coming when she started working late, when she began having private phone calls with David, when she suddenly took an interest in understanding our financial situation for the first time in our marriage. But I was busy, consumed with work that I couldn't explain to her, couldn't share with anyone. "And honestly," Ashley continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, "I'm relieved. I was getting tired of explaining to people what exactly it is you do all day. tech consulting, software development, system integration. It all sounds so vague. David has real clients, real cases, real success stories. David straightened his shoulders, preening under her praise. Criminal defense and corporate law require a certain caliber of mind, he said. Not everyone is cut out for it. I bit down on my tongue so hard I tasted blood. David specialized in petty theft cases and small business disputes. His biggest victory last year was getting a shoplifting charge reduced to a fine. But Ashley gazed at him like he was Clarence Darrow himself. The point is, Ashley said, reaching over to squeeze David's hand right in front of me, we're both getting what we want. I get financial security and a fresh start with someone who appreciates me, and you get to keep playing with your computers or whatever it is you do in that home office. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. 25 years, reduced to playing with computers. All those nights I'd stayed up working, all those weekends I'd spent coding and debugging and building something incredible. She saw it as a hobby, a childish fixation that embarrassed her. "Are you sure about this, Martin?" David asked, though his tone suggested he hoped I was. "Once you sign these papers, there's no going back. Ashley gets the houses, the cars, the investment accounts, everything we've listed here. You get the tech company and whatever assets it holds." I looked down at the papers in front of me. My signature would make Ashley a multimillionaire and leave me with what they thought was a failing business. They had no idea what they were giving away, what they were walking away from, and I wasn't going to tell them. "I'm sure," I said, picking up the pen. Ashley clapped her hands together like a child on Christmas morning. "Oh, this is perfect. David, did you hear that? He's actually going to sign." As I wrote my name on the divorce papers, Ashley was already planning her new life. "We should celebrate tonight," she told David. "Maybe that new French restaurant downtown. I can finally afford to eat somewhere nice without worrying about the bill." Without worrying about the bill. I'd provided for this woman for 25 years, and she acted like I'd kept her in poverty. We'd never wanted for anything. Nice house, good cars, luxury vacations, but apparently none of that mattered now. I finished signing and slid the papers back across the table. David gathered them up with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before, probably leaving behind a trail of broken families and grateful ex-wives. "Well," Ashley said, standing up and smoothing down her skirt, "I guess this is it then." I stood as well, my legs feeling unsteady. "I guess it is." She moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to me. For a moment I thought she might say something kind, something that acknowledged what we'd once been to each other. Instead, she smiled that cold, victorious smile. "Good luck with your little company, Martin. I hope it works out for you." Then she was gone, her heels clicking down the hallway, David's hand possessively on her lower back as they walked away together. I stood alone in that conference room, surrounded by the echoes of their laughter, feeling like I'd been hollowed out from the inside. But as I picked up my briefcase and headed for the door, I allowed myself one small smile. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd taken everything worth having and left me with scraps. They had no idea what was coming. The humiliation didn't start in that conference room. It had been building for 2 years, like a slow poison seeping into everything I thought I knew about my marriage. It began with small comments, barely noticeable at first. Ashley would ask about my work, and when I tried to explain what I was developing, her eyes would glaze over. "More computer stuff," she'd say with a sigh. "When are you going to focus on something that actually makes money?" I was making money, more than she knew, but the real project, the one that would change everything, had to remain secret. I couldn't risk anyone finding out, not even her. Especially not her, as it turned out. The first time she called me a failed entrepreneur was at the Morrisons' dinner party 18 months ago. I was standing by the bar, nursing a whiskey, when I heard her voice carrying across the room. "Oh, Martin's going through one of those midlife crisis phases," she was telling Sandra Morrison and 2 other wives. "You know how men get when they hit their 50s. He thinks he's going to revolutionize the tech industry from our spare bedroom." The women laughed, and my stomach dropped. I'd thought she was proud of my ambition, proud that I was taking risks and building something new, but apparently she saw it as an embarrassment, something to joke about with her friends. "At least he's not buying a sports car or chasing 20-year-olds, Sandra said. "Give him time," Ashley replied, and they laughed again. I finished my drink and went to find her, thinking maybe we could talk about it, clear up the misunderstanding. But when I approached the group, Ashley's expression shifted to barely concealed annoyance. "There he is," she said with false brightness. "Martin, we were just talking about your little computer project." "It's not a little project," I said quietly. "It's a serious business venture." "Of course it is, honey," she patted my arm like she was humoring a child. "Why don't you get yourself another drink? The grown-ups are talking." The other women exchanged glances, and I felt my face burn with shame, but I walked away, telling myself it was just the alcohol talking, that Ashley didn't mean to be cruel. That was my first mistake, making excuses for her. The pattern got worse after that night. Whenever we were out with friends or family, Ashley would find ways to undermine me, to make my work sound trivial or foolish. At her sister's birthday dinner, she introduced me to her brother-in-law's new business partner as my husband who thinks he's the next Steve Jobs. At our neighbor's housewarming party, she told everyone I was going through a phase and would come back to reality soon enough. Each comment felt like a small knife, but I kept telling myself she just didn't understand the tech industry. She'd married an insurance adjuster 25 years ago, steady, reliable, predictable income. This new version of me, working 16-hour days on something she couldn't see or touch, must have been confusing for her. But then David Richardson entered the picture. Ashley had always handled our legal affairs through a big firm downtown, but when our regular lawyer retired, she suggested we switch to David. "He's younger, hungrier, more in touch with current business practices," she said. "Plus, his rates are much more reasonable." I should have questioned why she suddenly cared about legal fees when she'd never shown interest before. I should have asked how she'd heard about David Richardson, a solo practitioner working out of a modest office across town. But I was distracted by work, consumed with the project that was starting, to show real promise, and I trusted my wife to handle the practical details of our life. David was 42, divorced, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from talking people into things for a living. He had thick dark hair that he kept perfectly styled, expensive suits that fit him like they were tailored, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The first time he came to the house for a consultation about updating our wills, Ashley spent the entire morning getting ready. She changed clothes 3 times, redid her makeup twice, and fussed with her hair like she was going on a date. "I want to make a good impression," she said when I commented on the effort. "Professional appearance matters in business." During the meeting, Ashley hung on David's every word. When he explained estate planning strategies, she nodded like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. When he made small talk about restaurants and vacation spots, she laughed at every mildly amusing comment. And when he asked about my business, her entire demeanor changed. "Martin's going through a bit of a career transition," she said, the same dismissive tone I'd heard at the dinner parties. "He's trying to start some kind of tech company, but honestly, it's not going very well." David raised an eyebrow and looked at me with what I now recognize as calculated interest. "Really? What kind of tech work are you doing?" I gave him the same vague explanation I gave everyone: software development, system integration, consulting for small businesses. I couldn't tell him about the real project, the breakthrough that was just months away from completion. "Sounds challenging," David said with professional sympathy. "The tech sector is so competitive these days. A lot of brilliant people have struggled to break through." "Exactly," Ashley jumped in. "I keep telling Martin he should look for something more stable, maybe a position with an established company instead of trying to reinvent the wheel." The conversation moved on, but I caught David studying me with those calculating eyes. Later, as he was leaving, he handed me his card with particular emphasis. "If you ever need legal advice about business structures or intellectual property protection, don't hesitate to call," he said. "I'd hate to see someone's hard work go unprotected." After that, David became a regular presence in our lives. He'd call Ashley directly instead of going through me, claiming it was more efficient since she handled our household finances. He'd drop by unannounced to discuss urgent legal matters that somehow always required lengthy consultations with Ashley alone. And Ashley began to change. She started working out more, buying new clothes, spending hours on her hair and makeup even when we weren't going anywhere. She'd disappear for long phone calls, claiming they were about legal strategy or financial planning. When I asked for details, she'd brush me off. "You wouldn't understand," became her favorite phrase. David explains things in ways that actually make sense. The criticism of my work intensified too. Every setback, every long night, every moment of stress became evidence of my failure in her eyes. David says, "Most small businesses fail within the first 5 years," she'd announce over breakfast. "Maybe you should consider your exit strategy." David thinks you'd be much happier in a corporate environment where your skills would be properly valued. David knows successful people, Martin. He could introduce you to the right contacts if you just admit this isn't working. David, David, David. His name became a constant presence in our house, a reminder of everything I apparently wasn't and everything he supposedly was. The final blow came at last year's Christmas party at the Hendersons' house. I was talking to Jim Henderson about market trends when I overheard Ashley across the room, drink in hand, holding court with a group of wives. "I swear sometimes I feel like I'm married to a teenager," she was saying, loud enough for half the party to hear. "Martin spends all day in his little office playing with computers and acting like he's going to change the world. Meanwhile, I'm dealing with real life, bills, taxes, actual responsibilities." "That must be so frustrating," one of the women murmured sympathetically. "It is," Ashley continued, warming to her audience. "And the worst part is he's so secretive about it, like he's working on some top-secret government project instead of whatever little app or website he's building. David says that kind of secrecy usually means someone's trying to hide their lack of progress." My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to march over there and tell them all exactly what I was building, exactly how much it was worth, exactly how wrong they were. But I couldn't. The project was too important, too close to completion. One leak, one careless word, and competitors could steal years of work. Instead, I left the party early, claiming a headache. Ashley stayed behind, probably to get more sympathy from her friends about her disappointing husband. That night, lying in bed while she was still out, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been refusing to see. My wife was having an affair. Maybe not physical yet, but emotional, certainly. She'd fallen in love with David Richardson and his polished confidence, his easy success, his ability to make her feel sophisticated and appreciated, and she was getting ready to leave me for him. The knowledge should have destroyed me, should have sent me spiraling into rage or despair. Instead, it clarified everything. If Ashley wanted to see me as a failure, if she wanted to bet her future on David Richardson's smooth promises, then I'd let her. I'd let them both think they were so much smarter than me. After all, the best revenge is letting people underestimate you until it's too late to change their minds. I had 4 months, until the project was complete. 4 months to let them plan their perfect little future together, 4 months to let them think they'd won. Then we'd see who was really the failure in this marriage. The moment I placed that manila envelope on the conference table, everything changed. Ashley was still basking in her victory. David was already mentally spending what he thought would be his share of her newfound wealth, and I was finally ready to show them exactly how wrong they'd been about everything. "What's this?" Ashley asked, eyeing the envelope suspiciously. She was riding high on adrenaline from the divorce settlement, practically glowing with satisfaction at having secured what she thought was everything of value from our marriage. "Just some paperwork you should see," I said calmly, sliding it across the polished conference table toward her. "Before we make this official." David leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Martin, if this is some kind of last-minute attempt to renegotiate the settlement, I should warn you that—" "Open it," I interrupted, keeping my voice level and controlled. Ashley's manicured fingers fumbled with the envelope's clasp. Inside were 3 documents, each one about to shatter the reality she thought she understood. The first was a letter of intent, signed and dated. The second was a purchase agreement. The third was a bank statement. She pulled out the letter of intent first, her eyes scanning the corporate letterhead of Technova Industries, one of the biggest technology conglomerates in the world. I watched her face as she read, confusion giving way to disbelief. "I don't understand," she said, her voice smaller than it had been moments before. This says they're interested in acquiring—" "Keep reading," I said. David snatched the document from her hands, his expensive education finally proving useful as he processed what he was seeing. His face went pale. "This can't be right. This is about Martin's company?" Ashley grabbed the second document, the purchase agreement, and I saw the exact moment her world collapsed. Her hands started trembling as she read the terms, the timeline, the staggering figures that reduced her $6 million settlement to pocket change. $1.7 billion, she whispered, the words barely audible. $1.7 billion. That's the final sale price, I confirmed. The deal was finalized last Tuesday, 1 week before you served me with divorce papers. The bank statement fluttered from her nerveless fingers to the floor. David dove for it, his professional composure cracking as he saw the balance. $1,700,000,000 minus legal fees and taxes, sitting in an account with my name on it. Ashley's chair scraped against the floor as she stood up abruptly, swaying slightly. "This isn't real. This is fake. You're trying to trick us somehow." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my phone, opening the banking app with deliberate slowness. "Would you like to see the digital confirmation? Or perhaps we could call Technova's CEO directly. Patricia Williams is expecting my call anyway. We're discussing my consulting role in the integration process." David's face had gone from pale to gray. As a lawyer, he understood exactly what this meant, what they'd just signed away. "You knew," he said, his voice hoarse. "You knew about this sale during our negotiations. You deliberately concealed material assets during divorce proceedings. That's fraud, Martin. That's business," I cut him off, "and perfectly legal, as you'd know if you specialized in corporate law instead of slip-and-fall cases." The truth was, I'd been planning this moment for months. Not the divorce. I'd never wanted that. But the protection of my life's work from people who couldn't understand its value. "The company I built," I continued, "wasn't the small consulting firm you both kept mocking. It was a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform that can process and analyze data in ways that were previously impossible. Technova didn't buy some hobby project from a failed entrepreneur. They bought the future of machine learning." Ashley slowly sank back into her chair, her perfect makeup beginning to smudge as tears she couldn't control started flowing. But you always said it was just software development." "Because I couldn't risk anyone finding out what I was really working on," I explained. "Industrial espionage is real, Ashley. One leaked detail, one careless conversation at a dinner party, and competitors would have stolen years of research. I had to protect it, even from my own wife." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd hidden my greatest achievement from the woman I loved because I didn't trust her to keep it safe. And I'd been right not to trust her, just not for the reasons I'd originally thought. David was frantically flipping through the documents, looking for some loophole, some way to undo what they'd just agreed to. "The timing is suspicious," he said desperately. "Completing a sale this large just days before divorce proceedings suggests premeditation to defraud." "The timing was fortunate," I corrected. "Technova had been courting me for 8 months. I finally accepted their offer because I realized my marriage was over and I needed to secure my assets before they could be divided." Ashley looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "You knew? About David and me?" "I knew you were having emotional affairs. I knew you'd fallen in love with him, and I knew you were both planning to leave me with nothing while taking everything you thought had value." The room fell silent except for the sound of Ashley's ragged breathing. David set the papers down with shaking hands, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd just lost. $1.7 billion, Ashley repeated, as if saying it again might make it disappear. "That's what the company was worth?" "That's what they paid for it," I said. The actual value might have been higher. 3 other companies were bidding, but Technova's offer included the consulting arrangement I wanted. David found his voice again, though it cracked slightly. You can't just, this changes everything. We need to reconsider the entire settlement. Ashley has rights to marital assets. Ashley has rights to the assets that existed during our marriage, I said calmly. The money from the sale didn't exist until after she filed for divorce. Technically, I'm not even married anymore. Our separation agreement made that clear. The sale was completed by a single man with no legal obligations to anyone. The legal maneuvering I'd done wasn't complex, just careful. My lawyer, my real lawyer, not David, had structured everything to ensure Ashley had no claim to the sale proceeds. The company itself had been worthless on paper right up until the moment Technova's payment cleared. Ashley stood up again, this time more steadily, her shock giving way to a familiar anger. You son of a bitch. You planned this whole thing. You let me think. You made me believe. I let you believe what you wanted to believe, I said. For 2 years you told everyone I was a failure. You mocked my work, dismissed my ambitions, treated me like an embarrassment. I didn't make you do any of that, Ashley. You chose to see me as someone beneath you. Because you were working all the time, she snapped. 16-hour days, weekends, nights, you were never present, never engaged with our life together. I was building something incredible, I replied. Something that could have secured both our futures. But you were too busy falling in love with someone else to notice. David finally found his professional voice again, though it lacked his usual confidence. This is a substantial change in circumstances. We'll need to file motions, request mediation. You'll need to do whatever makes you feel better about losing $1.7 billion, I said, standing and collecting the documents. But the settlement stands. Ashley gets the houses, the cars, the investment accounts, everything we agreed on, and I keep my company and everything it brought me. Ashley lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Martin, please, we can work this out. We've been married for 25 years. That has to count for something. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then met her eyes. For a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with decades ago, before the bitterness and disappointment had poisoned everything between us. It counted for everything, Ashley. Right up until you decided it counted for nothing. I gently removed her hand and stepped back. The papers are signed. The deal is done. You got exactly what you wanted. A fresh start with David and financial security for life. $6 million is more than most people see in a lifetime. But you're keeping $1.7 billion, she screamed, her composure finally completely shattered. Yes, I said simply. I am. David was staring at the bank statement like it might spontaneously combust. This is the largest personal settlement I've ever seen. The largest I've ever heard of outside of tech billionaires and oil executives. Congratulations, I told him. Now you've heard of one more. As I reached the door, Ashley called out one last time. You can't just walk away from this, Martin. We'll fight it. We'll take you to court. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. You can try. But ask yourself this. If I was smart enough to build something worth $1.7 billion while you thought I was a failure, do you really think I wasn't smart enough to protect it legally? The last thing I heard as the door closed behind me was Ashley sobbing and David frantically dialing his phone, probably calling every lawyer he knew to ask if there was any way to undo the biggest financial mistake of their lives. There wasn't. I walked out of that building a free man and a billionaire, leaving behind a marriage that had died months ago and 2 people who would spend the rest of their lives wondering how they'd been so catastrophically wrong about everything. People think revenge is about anger, about striking back in the heat of the moment. But real revenge, the kind that changes lives forever, requires patience, planning, and the ability to let people destroy themselves with their own greed. I discovered Ashley's betrayal on a Thursday night in March, 6 months before our divorce. I'd come home early from a particularly grueling day of coding, my eyes burning from staring at screens for 14 hours straight. The house was dark except for a sliver of light under our bedroom door, and I could hear Ashley's voice through the walls. At first, I thought she was talking to her sister. They often had long phone conversations about family drama or work gossip. But as I climbed the stairs, I caught fragments of something that made my blood run cold. "Can't keep pretending much longer, David. He's always here now, always working on that ridiculous project." I stopped on the landing, my hand gripping the banister so tightly I thought it might snap. "I know you're right. The sooner we can get this done, the better. He has no idea what we're planning." My legs almost gave out. 25 years of marriage, and my wife was plotting against me with our lawyer. The man I'd trusted with our most sensitive financial information, the man who knew every detail of our assets and investments, was conspiring with my wife to take everything from me. I stood there in the hallway, listening to my life fall apart, one whispered conversation at a time. He's so absorbed in his work, he doesn't notice anything anymore. Yesterday he worked until 3 in the morning and didn't even realize I wasn't in bed. She was right about that. I had been working inhuman hours, but not for the reasons she thought. The AI platform I was developing wasn't just some hobby project or consulting side business. It was revolutionary technology that could change entire industries. Every hour I spent coding brought me closer to something that would make us wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. But I couldn't tell her that. The technology was too valuable, too vulnerable to industrial espionage. In Silicon Valley, fortunes were stolen with a single leaked email or careless conversation. I'd seen brilliant innovators lose everything because they trusted the wrong person with their secrets. David says we need to be strategic about this. File papers when he's most distracted, hit him when he's not expecting it. That's when I understood what they were really planning. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated theft. They were going to wait until I was completely absorbed in my work, then blindside me with divorce papers and take everything while I was too confused and heartbroken to fight back effectively. Ashley's voice became clearer as she moved closer to the door. "The house alone is worth over $2 million, and with the investment accounts, David thinks I could walk away with at least $5 or $6 million. I heard David's voice then, faint through the phone's speaker but unmistakably smug. "And that pathetic tech company of his will be worthless in the settlement. Who wants a failing startup run by a middle-aged dreamer?" My hands clenched into fists. They thought I was a failure. They thought my life's work was worthless. They had no idea they were planning to steal everything except the most valuable thing I owned. I backed away from the door carefully, making no sound as I retreated to my home office. I sat in my chair staring at the screens full of code that represented 3 years of my life, and realized I had a choice to make. I could confront Ashley, demand explanations, try to save a marriage that was already dead. Or I could do something smarter. I could let them think they were winning right up until the moment they lost everything. The next morning, I called my real lawyer, not David, but Patricia Chen, a corporate attorney who specialized in technology acquisitions and intellectual property protection. Patricia had helped me structure the business properly from the beginning, ensuring that my innovations were protected and my ownership was absolute. "I need to accelerate the sale timeline," I told her during our emergency meeting. "How quickly can we move if the right buyer emerges?" Patricia reviewed my files, studying the preliminary offers I'd been receiving from major tech companies. "With the platform's current capabilities, you could have a deal closed within 3 to 4 months if you're motivated to sell. Technova has been particularly aggressive in their courting." "What about asset protection during the sale process?" She understood immediately. "Personal divorce situation?" "Potentially. I need to ensure that any sale proceeds are completely separate from marital assets." Patricia smiled grimly. "That's manageable, especially if the sale occurs after separation papers are filed. The key is timing and proper documentation." That night, I sat Ashley down for what I pretended was a serious conversation about our marriage. "I know I've been distant lately," I said, following a script I'd carefully prepared. "This project has consumed me, and I'm afraid it's affecting us." Ashley's expression softened slightly, though I could see the calculation behind her eyes. It has been difficult, Martin. I feel like I'm living with a stranger. I want to try to reconnect, I lied smoothly. Maybe we could start having dinner together again, talk about things other than work? For the next 3 months, I played the role of the repentant husband trying to save his marriage. I scheduled date nights, brought her flowers, asked about her day with apparent interest, all while listening to her phone calls with David, gathering intelligence about their plans and preparing my own counterattack. The beautiful irony was that my renewed attention actually made Ashley feel guilty about her affair. She started being nicer to me, more affectionate, even temporarily ended her secret meetings with David. I think she convinced herself that maybe our marriage could be saved, that maybe she didn't need to go through with their plan. But David wasn't about to let a 7-figure payday slip away. I heard him pressuring her during their phone calls, reminding her about my worthless company and midlife crisis, convincing her that I would never be the successful man she deserved. "He's 56 years old, Ashley," I heard him say one night when she thought I was asleep. "This is who he is, a failed entrepreneur who can't accept reality. You deserve better than spending your golden years supporting a man who refuses to grow up." Those words stung because part of me wondered if he was right. I was 56, starting over in an industry dominated by 20-something prodigies. Maybe I was delusional to think I could compete with Google and Microsoft and Amazon. But then I'd look at my code, test the AI platform's capabilities, and remember what I was really building. This wasn't some midlife crisis project. This was technology that would reshape how businesses processed information, how researchers analyzed data, how entire industries operated. Technova knew it too. Their offers kept increasing, their executives kept calling, their technical teams kept marveling at what I'd created in my spare bedroom office. "This is the most elegant machine learning architecture we've ever seen," their CTO told me during a video conference. "The processing efficiency alone is worth hundreds of millions, but the scalability potential, Martin, you've built something that could be worth billions in the right hands." Billions. While Ashley and David were planning to steal millions, I was sitting on billions. The final piece of my plan fell into place when Ashley started getting sloppy about her affair. She began having longer phone calls with David, staying out later for mysterious errands, spending more time on her appearance when she thought I wasn't looking. I knew the divorce papers were coming soon. David had probably already prepared them, just waiting for the right moment to strike. Ashley was building up her courage to finally pull the trigger on 25 years of marriage. So I pulled the trigger first. I called Technova and accepted their latest offer, $1.7 billion for complete acquisition of my AI platform, with a 5-year consulting agreement that would make me an additional $100 million over time. The sale was structured exactly as Patricia had recommended. All proceeds would go to me personally as a single individual with no marital claims possible, since the transaction would occur after separation papers were filed. 2 weeks later, Ashley served me with divorce papers. I acted perfectly shocked, perfectly devastated, perfectly defeated. I begged her to reconsider, asked what I'd done wrong, promised to change, all while knowing that Technova's lawyers were finalizing the purchase agreement that would make me one of the wealthiest people in the state. During our settlement negotiations, I played my role to perfection. I acted like a broken man who just wanted to keep his little company, because it was all he had left. I let David and Ashley think they were taking everything of value while leaving me with worthless scraps. "You can have the houses, the cars, the investment account," I told them during mediation, my voice cracking with apparent emotion. "Just let me keep my work. It's all I have left of my dreams." Ashley actually looked sympathetic during that performance. I think she felt sorry for the pathetic man she was divorcing, this delusional dreamer who couldn't see how worthless his company really was. David was less sympathetic but equally deceived. "It's actually generous of Ashley to let you keep the tech company," he told me condescendingly. "In the current market, small AI startups are essentially worthless. The big corporations have too much capital and too many resources for independents to compete." If only he'd known that one of those big corporations had just paid me $1.7 billion for my worthless startup. The sale closed on a Tuesday. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday. On Thursday morning, I woke up as a billionaire bachelor, ready to watch Ashley and David discover exactly how catastrophically wrong they'd been about everything. The best part wasn't the money, though I'd be lying if I said $1.7 billion didn't feel good. The best part was knowing that their own greed and arrogance had blinded them to what they were really walking away from. They'd chosen to see me as a failure because it made their betrayal easier to justify. They'd convinced themselves that I was worth leaving because that narrative fit their story better than the truth. But the truth has a way of revealing itself eventually. And when it did, they would understand that sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is underestimating someone you think you know. I'd spent 6 months being patient, playing weak, letting them think they were so much smarter than me. Now it was time to show them exactly how smart patience could be. The envelope I'd placed on that conference table wasn't just paperwork. It was the culmination of the most successful revenge plan I'd ever executed. And watching Ashley's face as she read those documents was worth every lonely night, every cruel comment, every moment of humiliation they'd put me through. They wanted to take everything from me. Instead, they'd given me everything I needed to leave them behind forever. The first call came at 6:37 in the morning, 3 days after our divorce was finalized. I was in my new apartment, a temporary place, while I decided where to build my new life, when my phone started buzzing with Ashley's number. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 10 minutes later, then a third. By noon, she'd called me 18 times, each voicemail more frantic than the last. "Martin, please pick up. We need to talk about this. There has to be some mistake." "Martin, this is insane. You can't just— We were married for 25 years. That has to count for something." "Martin, David says there might be legal options. Just call me back so we can discuss this like adults." I deleted each message without listening to the end. I'd heard enough of Ashley's voice to last several lifetimes, but she wasn't going to give up easily. On Thursday evening, she showed up at my apartment building, somehow having convinced the doorman to let her up to my floor. I opened my door to find her standing there, mascara smudged, hair disheveled, looking nothing like the polished woman who'd laughed at my worthless company just days before. "Martin," she said, her voice shaking, "please, we need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, making no move to invite her in. "What's there to talk about, Ashley? You got exactly what you wanted." "You know that's not true." Her eyes were red from crying, and she kept twisting her wedding ring, a ring she was supposed to have returned along with the divorce papers. "This changes everything. $1.7 billion, Martin. That's more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. "It's more money than you'll ever see," I corrected. "The divorce is final. The assets are divided. You made your choice." She stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of wine on her breath. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can remarry, start over, pretend none of this happened." The audacity was breathtaking. Pretend you didn't spend 2 years mocking my work? Pretend you didn't fall in love with another man? Pretend you didn't plan to take everything from me while leaving me with what you thought were worthless scraps? "I was confused," she said desperately. "David, he made me think things that weren't true. He poisoned my mind against you." "David didn't make you do anything, Ashley. He just gave you permission to be who you really are." Her face crumpled, and for a moment she looked genuinely broken. But I'd learned not to trust Ashley's emotions. She was an expert at manufacturing whatever feeling she thought would get her what she wanted. "The money doesn't have to change anything between us," she tried again. "We could travel, see the world, do all the things we talked about when we were young. Remember when we used to dream about buying a house in Tuscany?" I did remember. We'd been 25 and 31, young and full of plans for our future together. But that was before Ashley decided I wasn't successful enough, before she started seeing me as an embarrassment, before she chose someone else over the life we'd built. "Those dreams died when you filed for divorce," I said, "along with everything else we used to share." Her desperation shifted into something uglier then. "You're being cruel, Martin, vindictive. This isn't like you." "You're right," I agreed. "The old Martin would have taken you back. He would have forgiven the affair, overlooked the humiliation, pretended everything could go back to normal, but the old Martin was a fool. So what? You're just going to throw away 25 years because of one mistake?" "One mistake?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ashley, you spent 2 years systematically destroying my confidence, mocking my ambitions, and planning to rob me blind. That's not one mistake, that's a pattern of behavior." She tried a different approach then, her voice becoming soft and seductive. "I still love you, Martin. I know I handled things badly, but underneath all the confusion and problems, I still love you." "No," I said quietly. "You love $1.7 billion. There's a difference." The mask slipped completely then, and I saw the real Ashley, the one who'd been hiding behind fake smiles and manufactured tears. "Fine," she snapped. "Be an asshole about it. But this isn't over. David has connections, lawyers who specialize in cases like this. We'll find a way to get what's rightfully mine." "Good luck with that," I said and closed the door in her face. She pounded on it for 5 minutes, alternating between pleading and threatening before finally giving up and leaving. I watched from my window as she stumbled to her car, her phone already pressed to her ear. Calling David, no doubt, to plan their next move. Their next move came in the form of a lawsuit filed on Monday morning. David had found a law firm willing to take their case on contingency, Peterson, Walsh and Associates, a group of ambulance chasers who specialized in challenging divorce settlements for desperate ex-spouses. The papers were served to me at my lawyer's office, where Patricia Chen and I reviewed their claims with growing amusement. "They're alleging fraud in the divorce proceedings," Patricia explained, flipping through the complaint, "claiming you deliberately concealed material assets during settlement negotiations." "Which is perfectly legal under the circumstances," I noted. "Exactly. They're also trying to argue that Ashley has rights to the sale proceeds as community property, but that's ridiculous given the timing of the sale versus the divorce filing. The lawsuit was desperate and doomed, but it served one purpose. It showed me exactly how far Ashley and David were willing to go to get their hands on money that would never belong to them. I decided it was time to show them exactly how futile their efforts were. Patricia filed a countersuit within the week, not just defending against their claims, but going on the offensive. We sued David for legal malpractice, citing his conflict of interest in representing both Ashley and his own romantic interests during our divorce negotiations. We sued Ashley for harassment and demanded that she cease all contact with me immediately. More importantly, we released just enough details about the Technova sale to make it clear that this wasn't some last-minute windfall, but the culmination of years of serious technological development. Industry publications picked up the story, and suddenly everyone wanted to know how a failed entrepreneur had built something worth $1.7 billion in his spare bedroom. The attention was uncomfortable but necessary. It established the legitimate nature of my work and made Ashley's claims look even more ridiculous. How could she claim rights to assets from a business she'd consistently mocked as worthless? The media attention also revealed some uncomfortable truths about David Richardson that he'd probably hoped would stay buried. A journalist from the Business Journal discovered that David had been facing financial difficulties for months before he began his affair with Ashley. His practice was struggling, he'd taken out several high-interest loans, and he'd been desperately looking for ways to improve his financial situation. Suddenly, his romantic pursuit of my wife looked less like passion and more like a calculated business decision. The revelation destroyed whatever remained of Ashley's faith in her new relationship. If David had targeted her for her potential divorce settlement, what did that say about his feelings for her? And if he'd manipulated her into leaving a marriage for money that didn't exist, what did that say about his honesty? I heard about their breakup through my security company. Ashley had hired them to monitor my movements, apparently convinced that I was hiding even more assets somewhere, and they'd professionally declined to spy on their own client. But they'd mentioned that Ashley had been seen arguing with David outside his office, screaming loud enough that other tenants complained. 2 weeks later, David withdrew from Ashley's lawsuit. His new financial situation, facing his own legal bills and a malpractice suit, meant he couldn't afford to keep fighting a case he was never going to win anyway. Ashley tried to find another lawyer, but word had spread through the legal community. Everyone knew this was a hopeless case, a desperate ex-wife trying to claim money she had no legal right to. The few lawyers willing to talk to her wanted substantial retainers up front, money Ashley didn't have. Her financial situation was becoming precarious too. The houses I'd left her were expensive to maintain, the property taxes were substantial, and without my income to support her lifestyle, she was burning through liquid assets faster than she'd expected. She tried calling me again in November, 8 months after the divorce. "Martin." Her voice was different now, smaller and more defeated. "I'm not calling about the money anymore. I made a terrible mistake. With everything. David, the divorce, treating you the way I did. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway." I almost felt sorry for her then. Almost. "Ashley," I said gently, "I forgave you months ago, but forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." "I lost everything," she whispered. "David was just using me. He never loved me at all, and now I've lost you too, and I realize you were the only person who ever really cared about me." "I did care about you," I agreed. "For 25 years I cared about you more than anyone else in the world, but you threw that away for what you thought was something better. Can't we start over? Can't we try again?" "No, Ashley, we can't." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "What am I supposed to do now?" "You're supposed to live your life," I said. "You have financial security, beautiful homes, and the freedom to make better choices than the ones you made with me. That's more than most people get. But I don't know how to be alone." "Then learn. It's never too late to figure out who you are when you're not trying to be what someone else wants you to be." That was the last conversation we ever had. Ashley stopped calling after that, stopped trying to contact me through lawyers or mutual friends. She disappeared from my life as completely as if she'd never been part of it. I heard through acquaintances that she eventually sold the big house in Westfield and moved somewhere smaller, more manageable. Someone mentioned seeing her at a coffee shop in town, working on a laptop, maybe trying to start some kind of business. I hoped she found whatever she was looking for. Not because I wanted her back, but because everyone deserves a chance to become better than their worst mistakes. As for David, his practice never recovered from the malpractice suit and the negative publicity. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state and was working as an associate at someone else's firm, probably still dreaming about the $1.7 billion that had slipped through his fingers. But I wasn't thinking about either of them anymore. I had my own life to build, my own future to create. And for the first time in years, that future belonged entirely to me. 1 year after the divorce, I was sitting on the terrace of my new home in Northern California, watching the sunset paint the valley below in shades of gold and amber. The house wasn't a mansion. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore, but it was perfect. Modern, clean, surrounded by vineyards and rolling hills that stretched to the horizon. I'd bought the property 6 months earlier, along with 50 acres of land that gave me privacy and peace. No neighbors close enough to hear my phone calls. No dinner parties where I had to pretend to care about office politics or social status. Just space, quiet, and the freedom to live exactly as I wanted. The consulting work with Technova had ended 3 months ahead of schedule. They'd integrated my AI platform so successfully that they no longer needed my guidance, and they were generous enough to pay out my full contract early. The extra $75 million sat in my accounts, earning interest I didn't need and couldn't spend. Money, I'd discovered, stopped being exciting once you had more than you could reasonably use. $1.7 billion was an abstract number, especially after taxes and investments reduced it to a more manageable $900 million in liquid assets. Still an absurd amount of money, but not something that defined my daily life. What defined my daily life was choice. The choice to wake up when I wanted work on projects that interested me, travel when the mood struck, and never again tolerate people who saw me as anything less than I was. I'd taken up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for during my marriage. My canvases were terrible, but they were mine, created without pressure or judgment or the need to justify how I spent my hours. I painted landscapes mostly, trying to capture the way light moved across the hills at different times of day. I'd also started writing, not the technical documentation that had consumed years of my life, but fiction. Stories about ordinary people who discovered extraordinary strength when their backs were against the wall. My editor, a sharp woman named Margaret who worked out of San Francisco, said I had a natural talent for understanding character motivation. You write people who are underestimated by everyone around them, she told me during one of our meetings. There's something authentic about the way they think and plan and ultimately triumph. Have you lived through situations like these? I smiled and told her that everyone has been underestimated at some point in their lives. The book was scheduled to be published the following spring under a pseudonym. I didn't need the money, but I wanted the satisfaction of seeing my name on something that existed purely because I'd created it, not because a corporation had bought it from me. But the best change in my life wasn't the money or the house or the creative projects. It was Eleanor. I'd met her at a bookstore in Healdsburg, a small town about 20 minutes from my property. I'd driven in to pick up some research materials for my writing when I saw her struggling with an armload of novels and a cup of coffee that was about to spill everywhere. "Let me help you with that," I'd said, taking half the books before she could protest. Eleanor was 52, a recently divorced teacher who'd moved to wine country to start over after her own marriage had imploded. She had graying brown hair that she wore in a simple ponytail, laugh lines around her eyes, and the kind of direct, honest manner that comes from having survived disappointment and come out stronger. She didn't know who I was when we met. She didn't know about the money, the divorce, the spectacular revenge I'd taken on two people who'd underestimated me. To Eleanor, I was just Martin, a guy who'd helped her carry some books and offered to buy her a replacement coffee. We'd been dating for 4 months now, taking things slowly and carefully. Both of us had been burned by marriages that ended badly, and neither of us was in a hurry to repeat past mistakes. "I like that you're not trying to impress me," Eleanor had told me during one of our early dinners. "Most men my age either act like they're still 25 or they're so bitter about their divorces that they can't talk about anything else." I'd laughed. "What makes you think I'm not trying to impress you? Because if you were, you'd be talking about your work more. Successful men always talk about their work when they're trying to impress women." She had no idea how successful I actually was, and I liked it that way. To Eleanor, I was a semi-retired consultant who did some writing on the side and happened to live in a nice house in the country. She knew I was comfortable financially. You can't hide that completely, but she didn't know about the billions. I would tell her eventually when I was sure she loved me for the right reasons, but for now it was enough to be appreciated for my conversation, my sense of humor, my willingness to drive 40 minutes to bring her soup when she had the flu. Eleanor made me remember what it felt like to be valued as a person rather than as a source of financial security or social status. When she laughed at my jokes, it was because they were actually funny, not because she was trying to keep me happy. When she asked about my day, she listened to my answers instead of waiting for her turn to talk. We spent our evenings cooking together, reading books aloud to each other, taking long walks through the vineyards. Simple pleasures that I'd forgotten existed during those final years with Ashley, when every interaction had been tainted by unspoken resentment and growing distance. Sometimes, usually late at night when Eleanor had gone home to her own place, I would think about Ashley and David. Not with anger anymore, but with something closer to pity. Ashley had texted me once about 6 months earlier to let me know she was selling the vacation house in Martha's Vineyard. She didn't ask for money or try to reopen old wounds. She just wanted me to know that she was downsizing, simplifying her life, trying to figure out how to live within her means. I'd responded with a simple message. "Good luck with the sale. I hope you find what you're looking for." She'd written back, "Thank you for being kind. I know I don't deserve it. I never responded to that. Not because I was trying to be cruel, but because there was nothing left to say. Ashley and I had said everything we needed to say to each other in that conference room a year earlier. Anything more would just be reopening wounds that had finally healed. David, as far as I knew, was still practicing law in Oregon, still struggling to rebuild a reputation he'd destroyed through his own greed and poor judgment. I didn't wish him ill, but I didn't waste energy thinking about his problems either. The revenge I'd taken on both of them was perfect, precisely because it wasn't dramatic or ongoing. I'd shown them exactly what they'd thrown away, exactly how wrong they'd been about everything, and then I'd walked away to build something better. Their punishment wasn't my continued attention, it was my complete absence from their lives. They would spend years wondering what might have been if they'd made different choices, while I would spend those same years not thinking about them at all. That evening, as I sat on my terrace watching the sun disappear behind the mountains, Eleanor called to say goodnight. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Just thinking," I said, "about choices and consequences and how sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be the best things." "Deep thoughts for a Thursday night," she teased. "Are you working on your book?" "No, just reflecting on life. How was your day?" She told me about her students, about the lesson plans she was developing for next semester, about the small dramas and victories that made up her world. I listened, asked questions, felt grateful for the simple pleasure of caring about someone whose biggest problem was whether to assign To Kill a Mockingbird or Of Mice and Men for her spring curriculum. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine, a bottle from my own vineyard, grapes I'd helped harvest the previous fall, and raised it in a silent toast to the man I'd been 2 years earlier. That man had been trapped in a marriage with a woman who didn't value him, betrayed by a friend he'd trusted, mocked and dismissed and taken for granted by people who should have known better. He'd worked 16-hour days on something revolutionary while everyone around him treated his efforts as a joke. But that man had also been smart enough, patient enough, and strong enough to turn their contempt into the foundation of his freedom. He'd let them underestimate him until the moment he could show them exactly how wrong they'd been. And then he'd walked away to build a life worth living. I finished my wine as the last light faded from the sky. Tomorrow I would work on my book, tend to my vineyard, maybe drive into town to see Eleanor. I would live another day of a life that belonged entirely to me, shaped by my choices and my values rather than other people's expectations. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I married Ashley 26 years earlier, but it was better than anything I could have imagined back then. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's building something so much better than what they took from you that their theft becomes irrelevant. Ashley had wanted David and $6 million. She'd gotten exactly what she'd asked for and discovered it wasn't enough to fill the hole she'd created in her own life. I'd wanted respect, appreciation, and the freedom to build something meaningful. I'd lost the marriage, but I'd gained everything else. In the end, we'd both gotten exactly what we deserved. The difference was that I'd been smart enough to deserve something worth having.